Hello, guys and gals. Me, Mudahar. Now, I've been talking a lot about, recent bad, depressing stuff. So today I'm going to go back to kind of just talking about the creepier side of the world, okay? Whether it be the dark web, whether it be internet spooky stories, or whether it be, in this case, a real life serial killer that is, as far as I know, probably still on the loose. Now, this is one of those interesting cases where, again, it's actually preying on one of my big fears, the fear of literally being poisoned, okay? Sometimes when I go out and I buy something from the grocery store, sometimes when I go to a vending machine, I usually generally take cans and I basically clean the tops of them. Sometimes I use a straw. And you want to know why that is? Because I've heard a lot of stories about poison effectively being used unwilling, like basically without anybody's knowledge, and having people basically put down without them knowing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, how does this kind of work, okay? How is there a vending machine? How do you kill somebody through a vending machine? So in Japan, a huge culture is vending machines, like millions of them exist. I think there was actually a report somewhere that about, for every 30 people, there is a vending machine. There's a vending machine for everything. There's vending machines for eggs, there's vending machines for juice, there's vending machines for all kinds of food. The thing about vending machines is, in fact, what actually was taken advantage of was the buy one, get one free scheme. So we all know what a buy one, get one free thing is. Obviously, you buy something and you get something for free. Well, in this case, the actual victim in this case was not just the people, but a company producing this drink right over here. Now, this health drink is known as Orinamen C. Now, if you look carefully actually at the bottle, the top of it is more of a pop-off. Normally, if you buy a bottle at a vending machine, you usually get to twist off the top, and you get to twist it back on for later. Now, of course, we all can't have nice things. Because unfortunately in this case, for this drink being heavily targeted, because at the time back in 1985, yeah, that's how far back we're going, this was actually the prime candidate for you buy one of these, you get one of them for free. So our serial killer at the time, who has never been caught, basically ended up buying one of these, probably at a different vending machine, going to a different vending machine that also sold this drink, and then spiking it with a actual chemical known as paraquat dichloride. Now, if you want to know what paraquat dichloride is, effectively it's a restricted use pesticide. As far as I know in Canada, you're not even allowed to buy it. In the United States, and in Japan in this case, it's legal, mostly for people that are doing like farming, right? Especially high-scale farming. But it's also incredibly regulated. So the person in this case basically took this paraquat concentrate and took a bit of it, put it into the drinks, just enough to basically kill individuals. Now, for anybody that doesn't understand how dangerous this is, it's actually the talk of the town in places like New York City. It's also the talk of the town in places like California, where currently it's going through lawsuits in regards to its exposure and possible links to Alzheimer's. Now, of course, if you look at the actual paraquat concentrate, you can see that if swallowed, call a poison control center immediately for treatment. Speed is essential, because if you're not fast enough, this thing can absolutely put you in the ground faster than you'd ever expect. A California law firm that specializes in class action lawsuits regarding this says that ultimately, at the end of the day, how it kills is once it goes into your body over a period of several hours, days, or weeks. As soon as the poison has made its ways to the kidneys, the victim is unable to remove the poison from their system, as it begins to circulate through the body. Paraquat poisoning can cause the internal organs to shut down one at a time. Once the poison travels to the lungs, it severely impacts oxygen saturation, causing a medical condition called pulmonary fibrosis. This describes a group of lung diseases that affects the respiratory system. The disease thickens and scars lung tissues, impacting the alveoli and the connecting tissues. In a matter of hours, the lung damage worsens, and as the lung tissue hardens, it prevents it from expanding, making it difficult to breathe, as the lungs begin to fill with fluid, causing the victim to drown. It's actually one of the most disgusting, one of the most horrifying ways I would say to actually die, literally drowning. It's one of the worst ways to die. Compound that with the fact that 10 milliliters of the stuff is effectively enough to put you down. Just a teaspoon is enough. Now, ultimately, this became a huge issue in Japan. In fact, it's by far the world's deadliest case of product tampering in the world. And if you ever look at it, you can kind of compare it somewhat to the Tylenol murders back in the 80s as well, too. If you ever wonder why anytime you open bottles of medicine, or really bottles of anything, there's like a protective safety seal, it's because of assholes like this finding a way to actually indiscriminately poison people. So how many people died from this, right? It seems at least 12, maybe 13 people have died. The youngest person who died in this, unfortunately, was like a 17-year-old girl. So basically, again, to remind you, the way that this murder worked is the actual perpetrator bought these drinks at one store, at one vending machine probably, walked to another vending machine, most likely, and spiked. Basically, they placed the spiked drink in the actual tray, the purchase tray of the vending machine, or they placed it around the area. Right? They didn't actually break into the vending machine and place the actual drink in there. All they had to do was place it around. And people at the time in Japan were trusting enough to think, oh, free drink, buy one, get one free? Might as well take advantage of it. But they got one good drink, and they got one incredibly poisoned drink. So yeah, it really was a horrific story to have witnessed in this case. Now, ultimately, the end of the day, beyond the 13 people dead, there were actually 35 that became seriously ill. Because remember, 10 milliliters of this stuff is enough to kill you. So some people really did get lucky. And in a country with millions of these vending machines, the talk of the town really spread out. It happened in Fukuyama, all out in Hiroshima province. So of course, you kind of sit there and think, if it's happening here, where else could it actually be happening? So the interesting thing about this sort of murder that was happening, right? The interesting thing about this was between this, there was actually other poisoning cases in Japan that led to a general pandemonium that kind of struck from this. Now, beyond just, again, Fukuyama, there were also cases in Tokyo as well, where another drink known as real gold were actually used. Again, any of these drinks that were handing out the buy one, get one free option were targeted because you didn't have to break into the vending machines to convince somebody that what they bought probably was kind of because if somebody was to just go to a vending machine, put in their coins, hit their actual result, the drink would come down, they would just notice, hey, look, there are two drinks. They would just literally think they were getting something for free. Most people probably wouldn't think to hear if two drinks fell out. They probably would just grab both drinks and leave, and then down the road probably drink it. Now you might be wondering, hey, Muto, maybe there were two ways to identify the person who actually had done this. Well, think about it like this. I actually had two ideas in my head, maybe CCTV cameras. But remember, this is 1985 Japan. CCTVs aren't everywhere like they are now. Nowadays, you got flock cameras, you got vending machines with built-in surveillance features right there. So tracking these people became easier. But again, 1985, all this stuff really isn't there. Now, based on everything I could find, paraquat itself was actually known to the Americans at the time that it was basically used to kill actual plants, right? It was a pretty potent herbicide. But ultimately, for Japanese people, it was actually pretty common to acquire, and until the next year, there were actually regulations sort of put into this whole story. Obviously, since this whole story kind of broke out, there's been a lot of regulation regarding paraquat, but the problem is the ubiquity of using it at the time, as generally people who were actually just even home gardeners would end up using the same pesticide. And of course, tracking purchase records wasn't really something that was easy, because Japan at the time was a mostly cash society. So you could just walk into a store, give them a bill, and then you could walk out with this incredibly deadly poison. So you had to go to a store that dealt with actual farming goods, and then you had to provide probably some sort of identification over there. The thing is, record keeping isn't all that tight, and you also have to remember, right, the person who committed these murders were never caught. So it could have been somebody that worked for a farm to begin with. And because they worked for a farm, they probably slipped a bit of this stuff from an actual legitimate purchase, from an actual legitimate inventory. And nobody was probably the wiser. The cops did actually look down and dig through all of this stuff like I'm saying. And unfortunately, to this day, they still actually couldn't catch whoever poisoned. Again, this person, this serial killer, I would say, did this several times, and of course, actually killed at least 13 people. You also have to remember, Japan also has a culture of, high, suicide mortality rates, where again, this same poison at the time in 1984 was also used by over 1,400 people in Japan to take their own lives. So again, this is one of those things that became incredibly difficult to track. And it wasn't just this poison, there was also situations where another poison known as diquat was also used in this case. Now, unfortunately, because these crimes are so old, even though Japan has actually abolished the statutes of limitations on murder, or greatly expanded the amount of time it takes for these things to truly go cold, because these crimes are actually so old, they can't use these newfound laws to retroactively deal with this like serial killer. So if this person is, from my understanding, still alive, they technically have gotten away with probably one of the most serious killings that you could have ever seen in the country. And again, ultimately, at the end of the day, too, even I think even if the nation wanted to make this retroactive, I believe underneath the Japanese Constitution, Article 39, it says no person shall be held criminally liable for an act which was lawful at the time it was committed, or of which he has been acquitted, nor shall he be placed in double jeopardy. And from my understanding, this may also conflict with retroactive uses of like future laws back. And not saying that murder or poisoning people is necessarily illegal, but again, I figure that after so much time, if somebody can basically be acquitted of that crime because of how much time has passed due to the statutes, these kind of laws couldn't be made against them. But again, I'm not a lawyer, and especially not a Japanese lawyer. I would be totally open for somebody to correct me on this if I actually made a mistake in this. And you got to remember, too, this person may have also been young as well, too. One individual, one Tokyo professor who actually did criminal psychology, known as Hiroaki Iwao, actually said that it's not uncommon for Japanese people who live under tremendous pressure, which they really do, both on the job and overcrowded communities, let out their frustrations by hurting someone else. And maybe these crimes were not crimes done by somebody that got some sick joy out of killing people. Maybe they just got it done by somebody who wanted to put their pain onto other people. It doesn't necessarily make it okay, but it kind of gives you an idea of a motive, and maybe it gives you an idea of what this person's age may have been. But other than, all of this information, very little of it, we don't really know who actually did this kind of stuff. So they could be roaming around, they could even be dead, or they could be totally arrested for something unrelated to this. It's that crazy of a story. So again, you got to remember, for a actual poisoning spree that took over 10 people's lives in Japan, actually scared the shit out of a vast majority of people, to the point where in Japan, you got to remember, once it started happening, a lot of these organizations, like the Orinamen Sea, the drink that we saw, actually had to implement one of those pull open tabs, which we saw at the beginning of this video, simply because you couldn't trust people to do the twist off caps. Nobody would trust their drink. And of course, all along these machines, especially in Tokyo, they had to put warning signs and say, listen, if you spot a drink that's just sitting there, don't drink it. And now normally I wouldn't even do that in reality land, but you got to remember, back then, because of buy one get one free stuff, right, people were mostly trusting, until of course once they realized, hey, listen, some of these drinks could actually be spiked. Do you really want to play Russian roulette with your life on a free bottle of some vitamin drink? Probably not. Literally in 2019 in Yokode City right over here, they literally do mention, again, that they detected paraquat, a potentially deadly pesticide, in a can of beer left in the drawer of a vending machine in Yokode City. So again, anytime, I guess in Japan, if you ever spot any free drink in a vending machine, the simple rule is to just basically open the drink, probably drain it so nobody else drinks it, or chuck it away, or maybe just give it to the cops, okay? Just tell them you found it in a vending machine, and at least maybe then they can actually run an investigation before another serial killer or another actual mass murderer takes over 10 people's lives and injures God knows how many. Though you can see literally how scary it was. Tainted drinks were placed inside vending machines. Victims apparently inserted their coins, found 2 machines in the dispensers, assumed they had got lucky, and gave no thought to possible danger. And of course, this is why they printed 1.3 million stickers to be pasted onto all these machines, basically warning people, listen, we've got a serial poisoner on the loose. What's kind of insane about these murders too is that ultimately one of the scariest things that I saw was back in 1985 in Mie Prefecture, a bunch of milk containers that were served in actual schools ended up also being tainted, which I always find really, really scary about these kind of situations. It seems like, again, it's not just 1985, This is something that's probably still happening all around the country to this day. There's something interesting I always find about Japanese murders in that, like, or Japanese, like, assaults in this case, where at least in like America, people will just like whip out a baseball bat or like a gun. But in Japan, it's like because a lot of these things are usually tightly regulated or banned, you find a lot of people that are willing to use unconventional methods like these kind of poisons, or in some cases, like sarin gas. It's just wild when you look into the country in general, right? And something interesting about this whole story too is like it doesn't just have to be Japan in general. In fact, what's scary about this whole situation as well too is it also happens here in the US as well too. So for instance, I don't know if you've been following this, but back last year in Phoenix in Maricopa County, there was one influencer known as Charles Smith who was dousing bug spray on a bunch of food in grocery stores in Mesa. Don't worry, that person's already out early after that whole prank. And what was the prank, ladies and gentlemen? Well, this was actually the prank. A quick little like archive showed you that he was taking Raid bug spray, just spraying it all over the exposed vegetables and fruits right over there. So again, if you're somebody that is at a grocery store, again, you want to probably be careful because this is the reason why we can't have nice things in society. It's because of scumbags who are willing to basically poison people they actually have no idea about. You know what I mean? Like, I've covered weird stories where, like, North Korea sends out, like, VX nerve gas and inadvertently, like pulls that out at, like, an actual populated airport. And while that story is incredibly, incredibly scary, I don't doubt that this also isn't scary by its own metrics, right? Now, while this happened back in 1985, again, because it happened so long ago, I guess some would have to assume, is this person still actually active? Is this person around? Remember, throughout time, it seems like Japan has a poisoning problem that, again, has caused people to distrust whatever they get out of vending machines, and rightfully so. But actually, what I think was even wilder about this entire case, too, is what we're about to look at sort of next, which actually comes a year before this entire situation, actually kind of around the same time frame. So this is the Gilko Morinaga case, and actually, you probably understand this as the monster with 21 faces. It's actually one of the other scarier things that I kind of saw. So over 17 months from the actual kidnapping of the president of a company known as Glico, and of course, the last communication from what the government assumes is the prime suspect. This is also another story where the person involved never actually got captured. So again, we're looking at multiple cases of severe poisoning, kidnapping, murder, where the people have just never actually been caught. So this story kind of happened all the way back in March 18, 1984, where two individuals armed with weapons ended up breaking into the house of a president at the time, Katsuhisa Izaki. This is an individual that they were after kidnapping. They ended up breaking into this person's house, capturing him, and then, after demanding some level of a ransom, this individual did happen to escape. 3 days you're kidnapped, you manage to escape out of it, and then what happens afterwards? Well, eventually, later on in April 8, 1984, what happens is a string of letters end up going over to Glico and eventually also the law enforcement agencies. So these letters, write, "To the police fools, are you all stupid? What the hell are you doing with all that manpower? If you're professionals, then come on, catch us. We'll give you a hint since you're so handicapped. There are none of us among Izaki's relatives. There are none of us among the Nishinomiya police. There are none of us among the Flood Prevention Corps. The car I bought was gray, and the food I bought was from Dai. If you want more information, ask for us in the newspapers. After telling you all this, you should be able to catch us. If you can't, then you're just tax leeches. Shall we kidnap the head of the prefectural police too?" So, I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? Like, when I was younger, I read stuff about the Zodiac killer, for instance, right? Leaving letters to the police and, like, all the news agencies. But here you've got the guy actually taunting cops saying, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to, you want me to kidnap the head of the police? Like, you want me to go that far? It's obviously pretty threatening. And the guy gives actual detail, like the color of his vehicle, which is a pretty important detail for these cops. Now, ultimately, the end, he never got captured. He never got caught. So at this point, the monster with 21 faces starts telling and claiming that, they have these Glico candies and they actually lace them with a potassium cyanide mixture. So again, ultimately at this point, Glico wasn't willing to take any chances. They pulled off all their like stuff. And ultimately the end of the day right over here, then there were more letters sent out to the police just to taunt them even further, right? The letter said, "Dear dumb police officers, don't tell a lie. All crimes begin with a lie, as we say in Japan. Don't you know that?" Then another letter they had said, "To police fools, you shouldn't lie. If you lie, you steal. I also sent this to the Koshian police. Why are you lying? Don't hide things. Why are you complaining? You guys are having such a hard time, so I'll give you a hint. I entered the factory from the side staff entrance. The typewriter we used is Panwriter. The plastic container used was a piece of street garbage. Monster with 21 faces." So ultimately, the end of this, ladies and gentlemen, the monster just stopped contacting. They even said they forgive Glico by the end. But at the end of this mass extortion campaign and, well, mass poisoning event, yeah, it turns out that ultimately the person got away. So the police superintendent Yamamoto actually, took their own life by self-immolation. Pretty metal way to go, by the way. Actually, one of the worst ways to die, by the way, literally by fire. The actual, Monster with 21 Faces started writing, "Yamamoto Shiga Prefecture Police died. How stupid of him. We've got no friends or secret hiding place in Shiga. It's Yoshino or Shikata who should have died. What have they been doing for as long as 1 year and 5 months? Don't let bad guys like us get away with it. There are many more fools who want to copy us. No career Yamamoto died like a man. So we decided to give our condolences. We decided to forget about torturing food-making companies. If anyone blackmails any of these food-making companies, it's not us, but someone copying us. We are bad guys. That means we've got more to do other than bullying companies. It's fun to lead a bad man's life. Monster with 21 faces." The reality of it is that, if they were to be tried now, I guess based on the statute of limitations, they probably ran out on the kidnapping charge. But the thing about it is imagine the balls on these people, just straight up threatening law enforcement agencies like this, and by the end of it, straight up saying it's fun to be bad and just getting away with it. I think it is crazy to think about it. The closest image that people have to the Fox-eyed man is this description of what appears to be just your average Japanese salaryman. And again, the only CCTV image to be found of the videotape man in this case was this person right over here. Aside from this, there is no other lead to have gone off of. And the thing about it is, again, back in 1984, 1985, you think you have enough, but look how much time has passed. Can you identify the monster with 21 faces? At this point, you probably should be adding a whole new face to it because so much time has actually ended up passing. The interesting part about this, right, is that over time, the cops looked at over 120,000 people of interest. And despite the scale of this investigation, nobody ended up getting caught. So yeah, poisoning, pretty huge thing in Japan. In fact, what I've learned is it's a pretty huge thing all over the world. From the Tylenol poisonings to the vending machine murders to this whole story. If it's one thing that I get freaked out about in life is anytime I get, a nice can of iced tea from the old vending machine. I don't get this from vending machines, but if I did, I'd probably be thinking twice about sipping from it because who knows what somebody could tamper with it. At least here, the vending machines, what was inside of them were pretty clean products because there was never any sign of any breaking or entering into that. But any free can sitting around, even if it was, I guess, completely closed, who knows what could be in it? I mean, this drink isn't even carbonated. It might be easy for somebody to just poke a hole somewhere and stick some paraquat in here. And who knows, after a few weeks, I could fucking end up dead. So again, gotta be a little bit careful, man. The vending machine murders are no joke. Ladies and gentlemen, hopefully, this kind of was interesting to some people watching. It was to me. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it.